All right, Shabbos, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Nisan, Saeed and Sima Haken, for dedicating all the Shomer Joshos this month to show their Hakarat Hatov to Hashem for all of his Nisim and Niflaot. May Hakadosh Baruch Hu redeem all of the hostages and bring complete Hatzlacha to Eretz Yisrael and to Yisrael. Our week of learning sponsors, the Rom and Bravo families, Lezecher Nishmas, their father, Mordechai ben Yisxak. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the neshama will have an aliya, and the family a neshama. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, a lot of exciting Gemara today. Today's daf is Mem Ches 48, and we are picking up Metzia Hashem on Mem Zayin Days 47b at the two dots. I don't want to say the middle of the page because that would be that would be unfair. It would be unfair. It's a little bit below the middle of the page. A line below the middle of the page. So two dots. Kitzad Moshe Chemenu Peros v'lo Nasan lo Maos Inu Yochal Lachsamos. So let's remember again this whole yisod that we are learning, this concept ultimately again of Kinyan Chalipin, and the Gemara's consistent reinforcement of this idea that Chalipin works not through money, right? We established in yesterday's daf. Money cannot be the vehicle for the Chalipin, nor can money be acquired in Chalipin. So therefore the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, if you go ahead and you take the produce, and even though you did not go ahead and give the money, you cannot renege on the transaction. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Devar Torah, most konos. So we're going to keep seeing this Rabbi Yochanan over and over and over again. Right? Rabbi Yochanan said that halacha l'maisa midaraisa, money acquires. Now both say this is going to be a fundamental machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And this machlokes and Meretz Hashem is going to follow us throughout the entirety of this daf. Rabbi Yochanan says midaraisa, when you go ahead and you give money, money affects the transaction. Ma'os konos. So why did Chazal say, then Chazal changed that, right? And Chazal said, no, you can't acquire things through money, rather again, only through Mashiach. Why did Chazal do that? We saw this in yesterday's episode. So what are we concerned about? We're concerned that if money acquires, what's going to happen? Let's just play this out. I go ahead and I go over to Reuven. I buy $1,000 worth of wheat. I give Reuven $1,000. So now again, at that point, I've tendered the money. I now, midaraisa, I am the owner. What am I concerned about? I'm concerned if a fire is going to break out in Reuven's silo. $1,000 of wheat is going to be destroyed. And Reuven is going to say, so sorry for your loss. So sorry for your loss. So therefore I will say, in order to shift the burden ultimately again onto the seller to watch over my produce until it's delivered, Chazal made him responsible literally until it's delivered. I think, Marcus, 1 second. Man by Shlume. But 1 second. If there's a fire, whoever lit the fire is going to be responsible anyway. In other words, the Gemara says, you're making it sound like there's no responsibility. There will be responsibility. Ella, Gezer Shema Tipol Dleika Ba'onis. So says, no, you're right. We're not concerned about a fire that's kindled by someone, because at that point, there would be responsibility from the kindler. Rather, what are we worried about? A fire that breaks out on its own. Just again, a fire that wasn't set by someone, an accidental fire. So if you go ahead and you put the produce in Reuven's possession, Reuven's the seller, right? You put it in his possession until he delivers it to me. Then he's going to go and be Moser Nefesh. He's going to push himself to try to save the produce because he doesn't want to be out the loss. Ve'ilo lo Moser Nefesh tarach umatzil. So we'll say this is the position of Yochanan. Midaraisa ma'os konos, right? Midaraisa, money does acquire. So therefore, again, as soon as you pay for something, it is yours. So why did Chazal say, no, money doesn't acquire? You need Mashiach out of a concern that halacha l'maisa, that what's going to happen? The object is going to be lost while still in the physical possession of the seller. The seller has absolutely no motivation to safeguard the item because, hey, I'm already the owner, and therefore, again, I'm going to suffer a loss. So therefore, buyer protection, Rabbi said, it's the part of buyer protection. Buyer protection says, it is not mine, the purchaser's, until it gets to me, which means, even if I paid for it, the seller has complete responsibility to safeguard that item. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish says, no. Mishicha mefureshes min HaTorah. Reish Lakish says, not true. Midaraisa, Mishicha is what acquires something on behalf of the purchaser, not money. That's Reish Lakish. Gemara says, my time is Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, where do you get that from? Whereas in other words, we'll say, it's interesting. The Gemara doesn't ask, well, the Gemara we spoke about already again, Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara says, Rish Lakish, where do you get this from? Amar Kra, v'chi simkaru mimkar la'amisecha, o kano miyad amisecha. So we'll say the pasuk over here, just the context. The pasuk is talking about no, the prohibition to overcharge. Prohibition to overcharge. So the lashon of the pasuk is, when you will acquire something, which literally means when you will sell something to your fellow, o kano miyad amisecha, or you acquire something from the hand of your fellow. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Davar hanikna miyad liyad. So Rish Lakish says, you see from here, how do you acquire something? When you get it, when it goes from the seller's hand to the purchaser's hand, i.e., Mashicha. So Rish Lakish says, you see from this pasuk that halacha l'maisa midaraisa, the way to acquire something is through Mashicha. Davar hanikna right mi okano miyad amisecha. Davar hanikna miyad liyad. Mashicha, that's what acquires. Okay, but Rabbi Yochanan, so now we have our friend. So I just want to point out what he saw this machlokes. This is right. Rabbi Yochanan is saying midaraisa you acquire through money. You pay for something, it's yours. It's yours, right? It's yours, and move forward. Chazal stepped in and changed that around. That's for good reasons, by protection. Rish Lakish, absolutely not. Midaraisa, Mashicha is kona. Okay, says the Gemara. Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, Amr miyad, mi'uti karka l'es be'ona. Rabbi Yochanan, so what does Rabbi Yochanan do with miyad? Right? What does Rabbi Yochanan do with the pasuk of Rish Lakish? O kano miyad amitecha. So Rish Lakish says this comes. Sorry, Rabbi Yochanan, what does he do with it? Rabbi Yochanan says it comes to teach me that ona is actually interesting halacha. Ona doesn't apply to karka. So we'll say this is actually a fascinating idea in general, that the concept of ona, overcharging, undercharging, doesn't apply to real estate. Right? Why not? It actually makes a lot of sense. We'll say real estate has such subjective value. So the concept of ona says, if I want to go ahead, I want to buy a car, right? So we'll say, a car, I don't know if a car is even a good example. Yeah, a car is an objective. I want to buy a shovel. Let's keep it like that. I want to buy a shovel. A shovel has an objective value, right? Real estate has subjective value, right? For a variety of different reasons. So therefore, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan says the laws of ona don't apply to real estate. Interesting. Rish Lakish imkin lichtov kra dechi simkaru mimkar miyad amisecha al sonu o kano. So the Gemara says o kano lamali. So we'll say Rish Lakish, if that's the case, the pasuk could just say v'simkaru mimkar miyad amisecha al tonu. So why do you need that extra phrase o kano shmamina l'mashicha? Okay, so again, Rish Lakish is based on how the pasuk is written. Pasuk could be written. It could have been written in a different way. The fact that it adds in that phrase "O kana" teaches me that it refers ultimately to Mashiach Hazal. Rabbi Yochanan, "O kana my avilei." Rabbi Yochanan, what does he do with that phrase "O kana"? So he needs it for the following idea: V'chisimkaru mimkar al sonu. When you will go out and you will sell something to your fellow, do not overcharge him. I only know that the laws of ona apply if the purchaser was overcharged. How do we know that the laws of ona apply even to the seller? As I mentioned this before, the laws of ona are both for overcharging and undercharging. So I know that ona overcharging applies ultimately again to the seller. How do I know ultimately that undercharging? In other words, if the seller got less money, how do I know if that's ona also? So the Gemara says, TALMUD Omar, O kano asonu. Okay, so we'll say first word line, Rish Lakish will say, Tarti Gamar Mine. Rish Lakish says you can extrapolate both of these halachas from the same phrase. Good. So we'll say, so this is our fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yochanan, midaraisa, ma'os konos, Chazal switched it to Mashicha, Rish Lakish, midaraisa, Mashicha. Here we go. Tanan. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol shakesef biyado, yado ala yonas. Well, so we saw in our Mishnah, remember again, this is the last part of our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says, whoever has the money in his hand has the upper hand. Right? I was about to say now, when we say upper hand, what are we referring to? We're referring over here to really reneging on the transaction. Whoever has the money has the ability to cancel the transaction. So the Gemara says, Therefore, I'll say, the seller, who is now the recipient of the funds, he has the ability to cancel the transaction because he has the money. But the purchaser, who Bepashtos paid for the transaction already, doesn't have the ability to cancel it The Gemara says, "I armit b'shlam ma'os konos mishum haki mocher matzi haderbei lokeach la matzi haderbei." So we'll say, if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that midaraisa ma'os konos, that makes sense. Because halacha l'may says, since money affects the transaction, now the purchaser is the one in possession of, the seller, is the one in possession of the funds, and therefore he has the ability to cancel the transaction. But if you have that halacha l'may, money does not affect the transaction, then the purchaser should be able to cancel the transaction as well. Rish Lakish will say, you're right. So Rish Lakish will say, I only espouse my position in accordance with the Rabbanon of the Mishnah, but not Rabbi Shimon. Okay? According to Rish Lakish, now I understand the nafka between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanon. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, wherein lies the distinction between the position of Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanon? The nafkamina will be the position of Rav Chisda. What does Rav Chisda say? Dam Rav Chisda is actually very interesting. Kederach shetiknu mashicha b'mochrin, kach tiknu mashicha b'lekuchos. Rav Chisda holds that halacha l'mais in the same way that literally Chazal instituted mashicha for the seller, they also instituted mashicha for the purchaser. We'll say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, it's almost right across in Rashi. Kederach shetiknu mashicha l'mochrin, lachzor bo hamocher, kolzman shelo mashach halokeach. The same way that the seller has the ability to renege on the transaction, as long as the purchaser has not done Mashicha, so too Rashi says, next Rashi, Kach tiknu chachamim Mashicha lelokeach. So too Chazal instituted the power of Mashicha for the purchaser, meaning what? Lachzor bo b'shvil osa takona atzma, so too, to the purchaser also has the ability to renege, ultimately before Mashiach is done. Fine, Rabbi Shimon, less said Rav Chisda. Rabbi Shimon does not subscribe to Rav Chisda. Rabbanon islud Rav Chisda, whereas the Rabbanon do hold of Rav Chisda. Beautiful. Tanan, let's go weiter. Amru, Aval Amru. Misha paramidor hamabel who asadli param misha eno omin b'dibura. So we're going to spend extensive time on this piece of the Gemara on Amud Beis. So remember again, what did the end of the Mishnah say? See, the whole point of the Mishnah was that the concept of chalipin, right? That halacha l'maisa, once you take possession of the merchandise, so ultimately again the other person acquires their item as well, which was telling me that before Mashiach is done, anyone could back out of the transaction. That being said, then the Mishnah said, Aval, however, as much as technically, legally, you could back out of a transaction, before Mashiach has been done, once you go ahead and you pay money, if you back out of the transaction, you are subject to what we call this Mishapara curse. What's the Mishapara curse? He who exacted punishment from the generation of the flood, and from the generation of dispersion, Dor HaFlaga, right, Migdal Babel, Tower of Babel, right, and some other generations which we'll see on Amud Beis, right, is going to be punished by the same God who extracted punishment from the generation of the flood, the generation of the dispersion, will exact punishment from someone who does not stand by his word, right? That's the Mishapar. As I will say, if you pay money for something, right, you enter into a transaction, you pay. As much as we've established that the transaction is not finalized until Mashiach, if you back out of that transaction, you're a liar. You're a liar. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu exacts punishments from liars. That's the idea. That's the Mishapara. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. And again, we're going to spend, Amud Beis is going to be our whole sugya. I amrit b'shlama ma'os konos v'shum haki kai ba'aval. Aval I amrit ma'os inon konos. Amai kai ba'aval. So we'll say, now listen to this. The Gemara says, if you hold like Rabbi Yochanan, that midda araisa, money affects a transaction, right? But Chazal came along and said, no, it's not really valid until Mashiach. Then this curse makes sense. What does the curse say? I'm doing business with Ruvain, I pay the money, right? And now midda araisa will say, once I paid the money, now the transaction is valid. So now I decide, you know what? No, I'm pulling out. So then the Mishnah says, you're subject to this curse. You're a liar. I'm a liar. In other words, I gave my word. More than I gave my word. I gave my money. That means the transaction is really technically, biblically finalized. So again, as much as Ruvain can't hold me to the deal, because Chazal said that at the end of the day, Mashiach is Kona, but Midaraisa, really my giving of money is Kona. So if I pull out, I'm subject to this curse. Then that makes sense. However, we'll say if you hold like Reish Lakish, then no. Ma'os, money does not affect the transaction. Mashiach does. Then why am I chayiv for this curse? If I haven't done Mashiach, there's no finalized transaction. To which the Gemara says, you're right, Mishum Dvarim. Because I'm lying. Mishum Dvarim literally means because of words. In other words, even if you hold like Reish Lakish, that Mashiach is Kona, Ma'os are not Konos, nevertheless, I gave my word. In other words, I verbally committed to something. More than that, I gave my money. So even if technically speaking, it's not financially or it's not transactionally binding, again, I gave my word to a transaction. Now when I pull out, I'm lying or I'm not keeping my word. And that's severe. To which the Gemara says, Ubidvarim mikai ba'avo. Really? So I understand, not keeping your word is a bad thing, but should not keeping your word subject you to this significant curse? It's a pretty significant curse. Vatanya, we learn, it was a top of Memches, 48a. Vatanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Afa Pisha Amru, Talis Kona Dinar Zav. So I will say, even though, did I forget something? So I will say, even though we said, right, Afa Pisha Amru, Talis Kona Dinar Zav, Rabbi Shimon says as well, top of Memches. Even though halacha l'maisa, right, a talis acquires a dinar zav. And I will say now, remember, look at Rashi. The legabi peros havi davativa. Now again, this is going with the idea that you could acquire. Well, again, so remember, talis kona dinar zav is a case of where you do mashicha on the talis, and you acquire the dinar, and you acquire the gold coin. Now we'll say now, remember again, this is, Rashi says over here, the legabi peros havi davativa. Because we must remember again, we're looking in this case as the talis is the merchandise. Ultimately, again, the dinar will be the coin. The in dinar zav kona talis. And again, remember, the coin can't acquire the talis because the coin cannot go right. Money can't act as the vehicle for chalipin. We'll say 48, third line down. Mikol makom kach halacha. This is the halacha. Aval amru mishepara me'an shedor hamabul o me'an shedor haflaga o me'an shestom va'amora o mitzrayim bayam hu asid li para mimish she'ina omer b'diburo. So this is an expanded mishepara, right? An expanded mishepara. So even though you're right, we'll say even though again you have these halachas and these halachas say that halacha l'maisa, a transaction is only valid when there is mashicha. When someone takes physical possession of the object. I will say not only that, remember again, it has to be merchandise and not a coin that ultimately goes ahead and affects chalipin. However, I will say, if you commit to a transaction and you then pull out after you've committed, ultimately again, the same God who extracted punishment from the generation of the flood, from the generation of dispersion, from Sodom and Amorah, from the Egyptians on the sea, incredible, and Yomi, the Yomi, Egyptians on the sea, who asid para mimisha eno omen b'diburo. Ultimately, and I will say, he is going to extract punishment from someone who does not stand by his words. So I will say, so what do you see from here? V'anosein midvarim lo kana. And we'll say ultimately again, and if you just go ahead and so we'll say okay, let's finish this. V'anosein midvarim lo kana. Furthermore, again, if you transact business with words, we'll say verbal commitments do not affect business realities. V'chozer bo ein ruach chachamim nochehemenu. I will say now, if you give your word, right? So in other words, I commit to a business transaction and then I pull out, the rabbis are displeased with you, right? Ein ruach chachamim means the spirits of the rabbis are not pleased with you. So whereas Rava says, Anu ein lanu ella ein ruach nochehemenu, and Rava says, we only have this idea that if you back out of a transaction, the rabbis are unhappy with you. And both say, here's what's interesting. So which one is it? So on one hand you have this Gemara that says that if you commit to a transaction, even though it's not binding, and then you renege, so then you have this whole mishapara curse. Then the Gemara says, if you commit to a business transaction and you renege, what happens? The spirits of the rabbis are not happy with you. right? So which one is it? I was saying again, in other words, obviously those are kinds of rules. Either way, it's saying if you commit to something and then pull out, it's not good. But the severity of that retraction obviously seems to be contradictory. So which one is it? So the Gemara says as follows. Here it is. So the Gemara says, Ika I'm sorry. Dvarim veleka ba'adayim mos lo kai ba'avo. So no, I skip a line. Yeah, no, fine. So sorry. Dvarim v'ika ba'adayu mos kai ba'avo. Dvarim veleka ba'adayu mos lo kai ba'avo. So I will say, so this is very interesting. The Gemara says, here's what it depends on. If you verbally committed to something, but never gave money, and then retracted, I was going to say, let's take a step back. We are operating under the assumption that before Mashiach occurs, technically speaking, you have the legal right to pull out of the transaction. Okay? So I will say, but obviously everyone is agreeing that's not appropriate because you're not standing by your commitment. If a person makes a commitment, they should honor it. So halacha l'maisa again. So now I'll say, so now watch this. If you just make a verbal commitment, but money has not been exchanged, and now you pull out of the transaction, that's when we say, Ein ruach chachamim nocha himenu. Chazal are not happy with you. Chazal are not happy with what you're doing. Fine. However, if you gave a verbal commitment, and you paid money, and now you pull out, that's the mishapara. That's the mishapara curse. Then Rabbi will say, then there's that curse from the Mishnah that he who extracted punishments from the generation of stone, from the generation of Mabel, from dispersion, Migdal Bava, from stone, from the Egyptians on the sea, will extract punishment from someone who does not stand by his word. But it's really, that's when you give your word and your money. So I'll say, which makes sense. It's severe, but it makes sense in that here is almost like a double commitment you've made. Number one, verbal commitment. Number two, you've paid money. So I got it that it's not binding, but come on. You made this commitment, stand by it. If you pull out, then you're subject to this Mishapara curse. Verbal commitment without money, Ein ruach chachamim noche himenu. Chazal not happy with you. Verbal commitment with money, then ultimately again Mishapara. I will say I saw a very beautiful idea from the Chidushei Harim. I will say that here's what's interesting is this seems unusually severe, right? Actually, should we do it maybe on the base? No, let's just do it now. Here's I say this seems unusually severe, right? This idea over here that if I don't, right, I gave my word, I paid my money, right? And I will say, technically, I have the legal right to retract because the transaction is not solidified until Mashiach. And yet Chazal levy this pretty severe curse. Like it's a curse. It's a mishapara. It's a curse. We'll see exactly how the curse works on the days. But the point is, like this was like, you don't hear this by anywhere else in halacha, right? That someone who commits this avera does this, will be cursed by the God who extracted punishment. And look who he's talking about over here. The generation of the flood, the generation of dispersion, Sodom and Amorah, right? All these things. I both say, now, here's what's interesting. So what's the pshat? So listen to what the Chidushei Harim says. The Chidushei Harim, the Gemara never says as follows. He says, Dema shekilalu chazal, lemisha ina omed b'diburo, ba'onesh misha paramidor hamabel v'dor haflaga me'anche Sodom v'Amorah. De be'emes, tzarech l'havin, hare ein kinyan b'dibur bilvad. So I will say, so again, the Chidushei Harim says, I don't understand. But even if I gave my verbal commitment to the transaction, I gave my money, there's no kinyan. In other words, I got it. I understand. You should stand by your word. But at the end of the day, it's not like I'm doing something illegal. What it is that I'm doing is legal. The transaction is not binding until there's Mashiach. So what's going on? So he says, listen to this. So the Chidushei Harim says as follows. He says, Lios lo enoshi zu avera gasa. He was saying, the worst avera a person could commit is when you're not a mensch. When you're not a mensch. That is the worst avera. Umi she'eino omed bidiburo. So Rabbi say, when you don't stand by your word, then a person is not a mensch. A person is not a mensch. Person is not a mensch. If you don't have your word, if you don't honor your commitments, if you don't live up to the expectations that you set in your interpersonal relationships, then you are not a mensch. And the Chidushei Harim goes on. He says something incredibly amazing. He says, if you look at that list, Misha Para, Midor Amabel, They will say, what did Dora Mabel do? Again, remember, how is their fate sealed? Rashi says, what did they do? They were very smart. They stole less than a shava pruta. In Dora Mabel, generation of the flood, they understood how to work the system. They understood that theft, you're only liable if you steal more than a pruta. Right? So they stole less than a pruta. So are you legally liable? Are you legally liable? No. But you're not a mensch. You're not the mensch. In Dor HaFlaga, generation of dispersion, they valued building the tower more than human life. Not a mensch. Mitzrayim alayam, the Egyptians, cut your losses. Paro, have compassion upon your people. What are you dragging them into the split sea? Not a mensch. So we'll say, the Ibn Shalom says, I can deal, it's incredible. I can deal with your averos. We'll say, this is an incredible yisod. I can deal with your averos. What I can't deal with is a lack of menschlichkeit. If a person is not a mensch, then you have nothing. If a person doesn't have personal integrity, then you have nothing. If a person doesn't know how to stand by his word, then you have nothing. You do this avera, that avera, people sin up and down all day long. Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, good, we can work that through, there's tshuva. But you're not a mensch, you're not a mensch. Says the Chiddush, if you're not a mensch, then at the end of the day you really have nothing. And if you have nothing, then ultimately, again, the same God who extracted punishment from all of those who did not know how to exhibit proper menschlichkeit will be the same God that extracts punishment from you. Rabbi said an incredible thing. Now again, to be clear, not to say being a mensch is enough, and if you're a mensch, you don't have to worry about any of the other ritual details or mitzvah obligations. That, of course, is not true either. But Lamaisa, again, Rabbi said, we know it. Menschlichkeit is the foundation upon which a spiritual edifice is built. Without menschlichkeit, there is no foundation on which to build anything. Such a profound yisod, Rabbi say, absolutely overwhelming. More to say about that, but we'll save it for Amud Beis. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava. Rava says like this: Kra umasnisa Messiah Reish Lakish. There is a pasuk and a mishnah to support Reish Lakish. So also remember again, Reish Lakish holds midaraisa Mashicha. There is a pasuk and a mishnah to back this up. Here we go. Kra. So the pasuk says ultimately again, literally, well, actually we'll define it. O b'shomas yad, o b'gezel, or ashagesa amiso. So let's analyze this. What are all these things? Shomas yad, amrav chista, kigon sheyichid lo kli lahava aso. So this is talking about a situation of say where what? I lent money to Ruvain, and Ruvain identified a clear utensil, essentially collateral. Ashak Nebo say, by the way, these are all situations where Allah say if you owe someone something and then you deny owing it. So the pasuk talks about the liability and the culpability that one has under those circumstances. So again, Shumes Yad refers again, Sheyichel lo kli lahavaso. I lent Ruvain money and Ruvain identify utensil that would be the source of repayment or collateral. So Ashak, Amrav Chista, Kigon Sheyichel lo kli ashko. So I'll say, so Ashak ultimately is, I hired Ruvain for work, and halacha l'maisa, I owe him wages. I identified a utensil, ultimately, again, that could be used as the source of payment for wages. V'chia hadre kraksi, when the pasuk will say, kind of chazers over this, I will say, so the pasuk here is talking about a following situation. I owed Ruvain something, I denied liability. Then again, I will say, so again, I lied. There's Asham Gzelos, right? There's a Karban, there's restitution. And I will say now the second part of the pasuk. Then I admit that I lied. That's the pasuk he's talking about over here. And the rest of the pasuk talks about restitution. So V'chia Hadre Kra, when the pasuk goes ahead and goes back and reviews all of the information, is after I admitted that I owe the money, now I'm going to pay Ksiv. V'hayak yechta v'ashem v'heisheves hagzela asher gazal oes ha'oshek asher ashak oes ha'pikadon asher hafket oso v'ilu chumes yad lo hadre. Now, wasn't it interestingly enough, chumes yad, which again the Gemara said, Rav Chisda says, refers to collateral that was identified as payment for a debt, wasn't repeated in the pasuk. My time, what's the reason for that? Must be because since it was missing Mashiach, since Mashiach was never done, therefore there's not liability. Papa said to Rava, Ema Me oshek hu dahadar kra. Maybe it's included just in oshek. So the Gemara says, Hacham asking on what's the case? Kigon shenat lahemenu v'chazro ve'ifkido etzlo. So we'll say the case over here could be where the object was collateralized, then it was taken and then given back. So therefore, it's the same case as that. The Gemara says that can't be because that would be the same case of pikadon. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Trei gavni pikadon. It could be that the pasuk is talking about two different forms of pikadon. Ihachi chumas yad nami lehadre velukme. If that's the case, then go ahead and set up chumas yad in the same way. Go ahead, let her repeat it in the pasuk and set it up as kigon shenat lo hemenu v'chazer ve'ifkido atzlo. It was taken from him and then redeposited. So we'll say, had the pasuk repeated it, it wouldn't have helped, nor would have detracted. But now ultimately, if the pasuk doesn't repeat Shumas Yad in the second part of the pasuk, ultimately, again, it supports Reish Lakish, that Allah L'maisa, the reason it's not mentioned again is because there wasn't Mashiach. U'Shumas Yad lo Hadrekra, is that true that Shumas Yad was never repeated? V'hatanya Amr Reb Shimon min yayin l'tlitin Amr l'mal l'mata. So Reb Shimon says, how do you know to apply the pieces mentioned in the beginning of the pasuk, the latter part of the pasuk? T'chsev o mikol sheyishav alav l'shaker. V'ramachan Rav Ravua Amarav l'rabos Shumas Yad lihishavon. So you see from here it comes to include Shumas Yad, which again is the collateral, identifying collateral for a loan. Ultimately, again, to put it back at the end of the pasuk as well. The Mishnah says, you're right, but behenja mi alo hadrekra, but it's not mentioned explicitly. Good. So we'll say, so remember again, all that's happening over here is again, we're trying to bring a pasuk, ultimately again, and in Mishnah to support the position of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish holds that mid-oraisa, you require Mashiach. Midaraisa Mashiach is required. So therefore, Rabbi said the Gemara just went through that entire exercise, using that pasuk ultimately again to show that halacha l'maisa you require Mashiach and Midaraisa. Beautiful. V'tanya. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. Did I skip? I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm just trying to find it. Good. Masnisa Minalan. Sorry about that. Masnisa Minalan. We are now 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines, 13 lines from the bottom. Masnisa Minalan. So we'll say, fine. So that's the pasuk to support Reish Lakish. What's the Mishnah? The Sanya. What's the Brisa? The Sanya. We learned. Here we go. Nasna lebalan ma'al. So it's an interesting case over here. So what says here? I have. Let's say the gizbar. It doesn't have to be the gizbar. It can be anyone. Someone has a coin of hekdish. He takes that coin and he gives the coin to the bathhouse attendant. Now, I said, just understand what's happening over here. So let's say again, I'm the gizbar, I'm the temple treasurer. I go ahead and I take a coin accidentally. I have a coin of hekdish and I give it to the bathhouse attendant. Again, why? For what purpose? For my entry into the bathhouse. So nasna labalan, I go ahead and I gave my coin to the bathhouse attendant. What's talacha? Ma'al. So ultimately, again, I have committed mi'ila. Rashi says, "Va'afapi shadayin lo rachatz." Even though it's very interesting, even though halacha l'maisa, I haven't acted. So we'll say, so I walk into the bathhouse, I give the bathhouse attendant a coin of mi'ila. I have committed mi'ila, even though what? I haven't actually utilized the coin, so to speak. In other words, I haven't bathed yet. Nevertheless, the act of giving the coin to the bathhouse attendant is in and of itself an act of mi'ila. It's only the bathhouse attendant. Why? Because the bathhouse attendant, because now he has it in his hand, and therefore, again, there has not been any mashicha. Aval midi achrisa de mechasra mashicha lo ma'al ad de mashach. But in any other situation, mi'ila would not take place until when? Until Mashiach has been done. Take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi says, Dafka balan, katani demal, hanosi mishum deschiros kimurahi, benesinas apruta, then yachalach serbo, she'in kan malimshoch, avalim nosna al davar she'ishba malimshoch, emenu, lo ma'al adamashach. So we'll say, so let me just explain this just a second. So the Gemara is suggesting like this. When I go ahead and I walk into the bathhouse and I give the attendant the coin, so the transaction is done, right? There's nothing more to the transaction that has to occur. So therefore, again, because there's nothing more, essentially, Mashiach is accomplished through being moshech the money, right? So once the bathhouse attendant says, there's nothing else. And I will say what we're going to see is, interestingly enough, in other transactions where there is still another action, a potential Mashiach action to be done, ultimately, again, the Me'ilah doesn't take place until the subsequent act of Mashiach occurs. So it's only by the bathhouse attendant where there's nothing else to do, right? So I walk in, I give him my money, he takes my money, we're done. So in that case, Me'ilah occurs because there is no other Mashiach to be done. For example, I will say, listen to this, but let's say in another situation where there could be subsequent Mashiach, the act of Me'ilah is not complete, or the act of Me'ilah doesn't occur until subsequent Mashiach occurs. So for example, the Gemara says, Vatanya, listen to this case, Vatanya, look at this, Nasna l'sapar ma'al, l'masna l'ma'al sapar. Well, go for a haircut. And what do I pay for my haircut for? Right? With money of Hektish money. So I'll say, what's TALMUD? Ma'al. Ultimately, again, I give the money to the barber, I've committed Me'ilah. The Gemara says, V'sapar ha'bayla mimshech tispores. But 1 second, by the barber, there is an ability for Mashiach. What could I do? I could take his scissors. Right? I could do Mashiach on his scissors. Right? I lift up his scissors and I do Mashiach. Now he's ready to give me the haircut. So ultimately, again, the giving of the money by itself should not affect Me'ilah. What's the case over here? B'safar nachri delad bar Mashiach. But we're going to talk about this more. The kinyan of Mashiach only works by Jews, doesn't work by non-Jews, or at least which say that's a machlokes. Tanya Rabbi that supports that. Nasna l'sapar o l'safan o l'chol bali umnius lo ma'al ad mashach. We'll say in general, if you take a coin of hektish and you give it to the barber or to the safan, right? As we said before, halacha l'maisa, or for that matter, anyone who's providing a service, lo ma'al ad mashach. Ultimately, again, you're not chayiv for Me'ilah until you do Mashiach. Kashin adadi, but that contradicts what we just said before, right? We just said before that ultimately, again, the barber, you're chayiv if for Me'ilah as soon as you pay the barber, not once you do Mashiach on the scissors. Alav shmamina, kan b'safar nachri, kan b'safar Yisrael, shmamina. So we'll say again, it depends. On a Jewish barber, technically speaking, you wouldn't be chayiv from Me'ilah until you do Mashiach on his scissors. But for a non-Jewish barber, where there's no Mashiach by a non-Jew, Halacha l'maaseh chayiv Me'ilah as soon as you give him the money. Shema mina. So we'll say, what's the point of all this? The point of all this is it just backs up Rish Lakish. That's what we're doing over and over. Remember, again, both say the thing to keep in your mind. Today's topic is ultimately again Machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Mida Araisa, how do you acquire something? Rabbi Yochanan Mida Araisa, Ma'os Konos, money. You pay money, and Halach Lamaisa, now you are the owner of that object. Chazal stepped in and said, no, we're going to delay acquisition until Mashiach because of buyer protection, as I spoke about before. Rish Lakish, absolutely not. Midaraisa, it's all Mashiach. So what are we doing now? We're just bringing up a pasuk. Again, it wasn't exactly the most straightforward pasuk. It was a little bit of a convoluted drasha on a pasuk, but a drasha nevertheless on a pasuk. And now both say, what do you see from here? These brises that clearly indicate that Allah Lamaisa, something only is concretized once there is Mashiach. Beautiful. That's all we've done. Beautiful. Rav Nachman also said this. Dvar Torah ma'os konos. So again, we'll say other people lining up with Rish Lakish. Rav Nachman says midaraisa, right? Rav Nachman Dvar Torah ma'os konos. So again, we'll say now Rav Nachman comes along. Now remember, Rav Nachman doesn't hold directly with Rish Lakish. Rav Nachman is holding like Rabbi Yochanan ma'os konos, right? Ubad kalevi b'masnisa, right? And ultimately, again, Levi checked out this ruling in the Brayse va'ashkach, and he found the following. Nasna l'siton ma'al. If you go to us saying you give to the siton, now look at Rashi. Nasna siton ma'al, siton chen v'ni gadol, u'mocher peros harbe, lechen v'nim aniyim, v'nostan lo ma'os al yad kishem mochrin, u'betchilas akniya nostan iravon damim mu'atin ala kol. So we'll say, okay, so now we're about to open up another fascinating front over here. So watch this. If you go ahead and you give money to a siton, we'll say siton is a wholesaler. Right? Rashi says over here, siton is chen v'ni gadol, right? He's a large seller. And what does he do? Umocher peros harbe lechen v'nim aniyim. He goes ahead and he sells to retailers. right? So the wholesaler sells to retailers. Now, the wholesaler was a much larger operation, so he gives the example of it. The retailers sometimes were themselves poor. Now, what happened? V'nostin lo ha'ma'os al yad yad. Now, we'll say, how did retailers often pay wholesalers? In increments. So the wholesaler would essentially advance produce to the retailers. It's not really on credit. We're going to see what they did. We're going to see how they did in just a moment. But what would happen is, as the retailers would sell off produce, they would pay off the wholesaler. Finish Rashi. So v'nostin lo ha'ma'os al yad k'shei mochrin. They would pay off the wholesaler a little bit at a time as they sold off produce. Ubitchilas hakniya nostin eravon damin mu'atin alakol. So we'll say, so how would the wholesaler advance produce to the retailers? The retailers would give them some type of collateral, right? They would give them some type of down payment, right? And that down payment, that collateral would allow the wholesaler to advance to them the produce, and then again, the retailers would pay back the wholesalers as they made money. Okay, so naston l'siton. So we'll say, so now what happens if halacha l'maisa, right? Let's say one of the retailers gave the wholesaler hekdish money. So what's the halacha? Ma'al. Look at Rashi. Ma'al. Afagav d'lo mashach kalaperos shari harbe posek imo bebasachas. So we'll say committed me'ilah. Ra'am beis elo kash reish lakish. What does Reish Lakish do with this? Because I will say, remember again, Reish Lakish says, Midaraisa Ma'os Konos. So the Gemara says, Amar Lecha Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish would say, Hamani Rabbi Shimon. This ultimately, again, reflects the position of Rabbi Shimon, and therefore, again, it's not my position. Okay. Aval Amr Misha Para. So we'll say, so now let's analyze this a little bit. So now we'll say, so again, we have our open-ended machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. We're not going to do the halacha l'maaseh because we're not finished yet. We have more to do with this. So just keep that machlokes open-ended in your mind. Resolution in Eretz Hashem I'm going to try to do tomorrow before we get to the next Mishnah, which is tomorrow's daf. So here we go. So now, crazy sugya. Not crazy sugya, incredibly crazy sugya. Dramatic sugya. So we'll say back to our Mishapara. So we'll say, remember again, what was Mishapara? Mishapara established like this. As much as we've established that ultimately, again, you don't get possession until Mashiach. Remember again, we also clarified on the previous Amud Aleph that what? When do you get a Mishapara? What is a Mishapara? Mishapara is when? Verbal commitment and money. And then, so technically speaking, even with the verbal commitment and money, you still have the legal right to pull out. Right? But if you do so, you're subject to the Mishapara. If you just did verbal commitment and no money, then what? Ein ruach chachamim no chehemeru. Chazal are not happy with you. Okay, so now let's analyze. Aval Omer Mishaparos, here we go. Itmar. Abayi Amr, so let's say, so now here's the Shaila. I was going to ask, what exactly are the mechanics of this curse? So let's just play this out for just a moment, right? Reuven goes ahead and agrees to sell me his sheep. So what happens? I pay him the money, and Reuven makes the verbal commitment. And then Reuven says, you know what? I'm sorry. Too attached. Right? We've been through so much together. I can't sell you this sheep. So now I say, fine. Now Reuven is subject to the Mishapara. So the Gemara says, how does this work? So Abaye Amar, Aduye Modinale. Abaye says, we tell Reuven, right? Rashi says, Do Shintachsor Sofech Li Paramimcha. We say, Reuven, just letting you know, if you back out of this transaction, you will be subject to this curse. Rava Amar, Meilat Laitinale. Rava says, no, we curse him. In other words, we'll say, Abaye says, no one actually curses Reuven. It's not like we convene a Beis Din, right, to get a minion together and curse Reuven. Rather, we're just telling Reuven, by the way, if you back out of this, you are subject to this Mishapara curse. Rava says, no, we curse him. Right? Ultimately, again, Melet Laitinale, whoever is actually doing this, but there is an actual curse. There is an actual curse that is given to Reuven for this. Abaye Amar Aduye Modinale. So Abaye says, we don't actively curse him. We just let him know that his behavior is subject to this curse. Why? Dichsiv v'nasi ba'amcha lo sa'ar. Rabbi said the pasuk says that literally again, a prince in your nation you shall not curse. And as we'll say, Abaye says, we don't curse people. Now we'll say, so here's what's interesting. According to Abaye, what you tell Reuven is, your behavior makes you subject to this curse at the hands of Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Are we going to curse you ourselves? No, we're not going to curse you. But Lamaisa, you are ultimately again subject to this curse. The Gemara says, Rava says, Melat Laitina Le. So Rava says, ultimately again, we do curse him. Right? Tichsev ba'amcha ba'ose masa amcha. The Pasuk is actually a very profound Gemara. When can't you curse another Jew? The Pasuk says, Nasi ba'amcha, a prince in your nation. What does it mean, in your nation? When a Yid acts like a Yid. Right? When a Jew acts like a Jew. When he does what he's supposed to do, when he acts in an upright way, that's when you can't curse him. But if he's not ba'amcha, if he's not part of your nation, meaning he doesn't act like part of your nation, then you're allowed to curse him. You're allowed to curse him. And Shabbos again, it fits in very well with what the Kedusha with the Rebbe was saying before, that this whole idea of mishapara devolves upon someone who's not a mensch. You're not a mensch, you're not part of Klal Yisrael, so to speak. Right? But therefore, again, you could be cursed. So we'll say fundamental machlokes Abai and Rava about how this is working. I'm a Rava, so Rava says like this. Rava says, how do I know that literally, again, I will say, when a person backs out of his transactions, therefore is not a mensch, that we actively curse him. We actually curse him. How do I know that? So the Gemara says, listen to that. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, Yavolei Zuzi. Listen to this, what I'll say. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, somebody paid Rabbi Chia bar Yosef for salt. He was selling salt. So someone paid him money for salt. What happened? The salt iyakar milcha. So we'll say then the price of salt went up. And what happened? Rabbi Chia bar Yosef wanted to back out of the transaction because he didn't want to be bound by the lower price. He wanted to get more money. So what happened? Now salt became more expensive. Aslik made Rabbi Yochanan. He came up for Rabbi Yochanan. Amrlei zil havlu. So we'll say, so essentially now Rabbi Chia comes to Rabbi Yochanan and is essentially asking Rabbi Yochanan, can I back out of this transaction? Right? Salt went up. I don't want to sell at the lower price. I want to get out. Amrlei zil havlu. Rabbi Yochanan said, no, you got to honor the transaction. V'ilo, and if not, fine. And if not, so I just want to point out over here, this is a case over here. Rabbi Chia got the money, right? So the purchaser paid Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia has not yet delivered the salt. The salt is appreciated. Rabbi Chia wants out. He goes to Rabbi Yochanan. Which Rabbi said, by the way, is such a profound idea. Just pointing out, Rabbi Chia is Rabbi Chia. So what do you see from here? In matters of halacha, that you have an igiyas, right? In matters of halacha, ultimately, again, in which you have a vested interest, ask someone else. Don't paskin your own halachas. Don't paskin your own halachas when you have a vested interest in the outcome. So Rabbi Chia goes to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, listen, you got the money. Zil haflahu. Go ahead and honor the transaction. And if you don't, kabil alecha mishapara. And if you're not ready to honor the transaction, then accept upon yourself the mishapara curse. And I will say, if you say, like Abaye says, that Mishapara just means we tell the person that you are subject to a Mishapara curse, then says the Gemara, Rabbi Chia bar Yosef bar Oduyehu, is Rabbi Chia bar Yosef someone who you have to tell? In other words, I will say, at the end of the day, is he someone who has to be informed? He knows the halachas. Ve'elamai melat laitina le. Rather, what do you see from here? That Allah, we don't just inform the person, but rather, again, we actually curse the person. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, Asi lekabule alei letusa d'Rabbanan. So I understand is Rabbi Chia bar Yosef showing up to get a rabbinic curse. Is that why he's showing up? El Rabbi Chia bar Yosef iravon hu diyoyvile. Oh, okay. Rabbi say now this story takes a fascinating twist. Here it is. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef didn't actually get paid. Rabbi say, what did he get? He got a down payment. Rabbi say, in this context over here, a ravon doesn't simply mean a collateral, but rather it means a down payment. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef got a down payment, right? A ravon hu diyoyvile. So watch this. Rabbi says, so now, what's the shaila? Hu savar kenegda hu kona. So Rabbi Chia bar Yosef said like this. What does a down payment do? He said, down payment, Rabbi said, down payment gives you a corresponding amount of produce. So let me say this outside for just a second. We're not going to get into fundamental machlokes. When you give a down payment on something, what does down payment give you? Does down payment give you essentially a corresponding amount of, we'll call it produce or whatever item that you're purchasing? Or is down payment a payment for the whole? That's the fundamental machlokes. So Rabbi Chia over here had received the down payment for the salt. So Rabbi Chia said like this. Let's say I will say again, the price for the entire purchase of salt was $1,000. Rabbi Chia got $100 down payment. So he figured, what does down payment do? Down payment entitles the purchaser to the corresponding amount of salt. I'll pay him, I'll give him the corresponding amount of salt, but I'm not going to honor the rest of the transaction because I don't have to. And furthermore, salt appreciated, so I don't want to be locked in at this lower price. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, "Who's savar kenegdo hu kona?" So Rabbi Chia figured down payment only entitles you to a corresponding amount of produce. Rabbi Yochanan keneged kula hu kona. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that's not the way it works. Rabbi Yochanan, who we went to, says that's not how down payment works. Down payment is a payment for everything. Therefore, once you receive a down payment, that's it. Transaction is done, and Rabbi Yochanan, you can't go ahead and renege. Therefore, Rabbi say, it turns out this wasn't about the Mishapara. This was Rabbi Chia coming to Rabbi Yochanan, trying to figure out what is the halachic efficacy, ultimately, again, of a down payment. So we'll say, so now, this is a machlokes. Here we go, very exciting. Itmar, Rabbi. So we'll say, in general, when you receive a down payment, what is it? We'll say, this, by the way, is such an incredible Gemara. Rabbi. Rav Amar Kenegdo Hukona. Rav says the power of a down payment is a down payment ultimately, again, only allows you to acquire a corresponding amount of merchandise. That's what a down payment does. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, Keneged Kula Hukona. Rabbi Yochanan says, not true. When you get a down payment ultimately, again, acquires everything. We'll say that is the chap of a down payment. In other words, I'll say, I'm not making an installment payment, I'm making a down payment. So a down payment essentially says, with this payment, I acquire everything. I will say, what about the rest of the purchase price? What about the rest of the purchase? What is that? It's a loan. The down payment goes ahead and fully affects the transaction. The rest of the payment is now a loan. So both say, fundamental machlokes in the mechanics of down payment. So exciting. So if a person gives a down payment to his friend, so we'll see, now watch this. I enter into, all right, we'll see, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up at Hashem with the rest with this tomorrow. Oh, gosh. Okay, Yantav is coming, and also Thursday is very short, Amar Aleph. We're fine, we're good, we'll get there. I'll say, no point in rushing this, too good to rush. Shkarach I'll say. All right, Chevranzim, have a great day, everyone. Mamish, Michael Cherniansky, you're the only guy, and Ken, you're the only, Mamish, almost all of you of Eretz Yisrael. Incredible. All right, Chevra, have a great day.